Hello, I'm Laura Wimberly, and welcome to episode 3 of the Questions podcast. I'm excited about this one. In this episode, I sat down with Kirby Johnson. She is a certified EMDR therapist and is trained in DBT. She also happens to be my cousin. Kirby has a passion for helping others recover from trauma and addictions and has become a trusted guide in the realm of mental health. I hope you enjoy episode 3 of the Questions podcast with Kirby. Hello, cuz.
Hey,
Welcome to the Questions podcast.
thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
I guess go ahead.
I've never done a podcast before, so I'm a little intimidated to hear back and see like what my voice actually sounds like on this thing, but
I know, it's brutal. So we haven't seen each other since February, I guess, and you're in Louisiana, I'm in Texas.
yeah, we're dying over here right now because of the heat, so I'm sure y'all probably
Oh yeah.
probably much different than ours is, but
No, it was 106 yesterday, so
what? Okay, maybe y'all's is a little bit worse than ours.
oh, it's brutal. It's much hotter this June than it's been in a long time, so
I feel like we start saying that every summer though. I'm like, this does not feel like the same summers that I grew up in as a kid.
same.
Yeah.
So
But
what do you feel like when I asked you to do the podcast? What was your first thought?
oh no. Well, first thought was like, okay, this is my cousin who looks like Jennifer Garner and she's gorgeous and it's gonna be super cool. And then I'm like, what the heck am I gonna do on this thing?
You're genius, and what we're going to talk about, that's what you're going to do.
I'm so not though, but I appreciate that.
Well, and you had made a comment too at one point of like, how are we going to get through this? Because we typically just laugh through everything. Like,
Yes.
it's going to be interesting that we're talking about like heavier topics, which we do. I mean, we talk about all kinds of stuff, but I'm like, this is going to be interesting.
I will say though, and some my therapist friends can understand this, but because of the work that we do and what we have to deal with on a daily basis, our humor can get pretty dark. So if there are certain things that I laugh at, like I promise you, I'm not some kind of psycho person that has no feelings or emotions, but you kind of have to do that to survive a
I
little bit.
bet. Yeah. Make it a little lighter.
Yeah. So if I minimize anything, I promise I'm not a terrible person.
I know.
I care a lot about people.
I can
So
vouch for you. You're not.
yeah, thanks.
Well, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself a little bit? Like, you're a licensed therapist, so kind of tell me like what kind of therapist are you, and why did you choose to go into this field, this kind of career path?
Sure. What kind of therapist am I? That's a good question. Um,
Specialize in, maybe I should say it like that.
yeah. Well, so originally, like my undergrad was in business and I was pre-law. So my plan was to go to law school, and I don't even know that I was necessarily passionate about that in any way, but wanted to make money. Like I literally remember growing up as a kid and I was terrified the Lord was going to ask me to be a missionary. And I was like, I cannot do that because they don't make any money. And so, but
Or
yeah, and but I mean, which God bless the missionaries, and I have gone on many mission trips. Our aunt and uncle are missionaries,
and they're
and
not poor. That's the thing. I
yeah,
don't want to think that as a kid, but they're not.
yeah, I don't know, but that I was terrified of that as a kid. I think there's this part of me that was like, I must be independent and need to be able to take care of myself and not depend on anybody, which is my own childhood trauma. But anyways, but I had a pretty rough time in college. I lost my best friend during that time to a tragic car accident and just kind of walked away from the Lord a little bit. And I had kind of gotten to this place where I literally had these thoughts. If I went to law school, I'm going to probably be able to argue that God isn't real or just keep going down a bad path. And so, for whatever reason, this was strictly the Lord, but I ended up moving to Washington, actually living with that same aunt and uncle for a little bit, and did an internship discipleship type program after I graduated college. And that kind of set me on a totally different trajectory for my life. So I actually did work in ministry for about 5 years. And a lot of what I was seeing, I mean, I was just basically kind of doing some pastoral care type stuff and working with a lot of students that were in high school and college age, but also like so many broken people dealing with so much trauma and just mental health stuff. Because I mean, growing up, I grew up in a very small town and counselors were not a thing. Like, I don't think, I mean, we didn't even have a counselor anywhere around where we lived, um, or in the schools or anything like that. But one thing that I was seeing in the church and working in ministry, which, God bless the pastors and all of those, like we need that. But it just seemed like we were expected to get over our stuff and that the Lord could just, which the Lord can take these things away, but also like when we're really struggling with depression or trauma or have been abused in some type of way, like that leaves a mark and that leaves an impact on us. And sometimes we need more. And so I was getting to a point where I was referring a lot of my students out for therapy. And actually, my best friend in Washington, her dad owned his own counseling agency, and we were like referring people out to him left and right. And I kind of came to this point of like, I want to do that. Like, I want to know I want to be better equipped to help people and help them navigate through hardships and trauma and not feel like they're staying in this bondage or baggage or whatever. And so like I'm truly passionate about helping people walk in freedom. And so then after working there for 5 years, I was like, I'm going to go to grad school. And so I went back to school and went into counseling, and there are multiple different routes that you can take to become a counselor, which I had no idea on any of these. And so I kind of just picked one, not really knowing what I was doing or what to expect. And that kind of just started leading me down that path. And so I moved back to Louisiana, went to grad school. And clinical mental health was the program that I went in, because there's clinical mental health, there's marriage and family therapy, there's all kinds of different types of counseling programs. And I didn't know one over the other because I had no background in it. And so really learning how to be a therapist happens after grad school, much like anything else that we do, getting into it, like actually practicing it. And so after you graduate, you work with a supervisor for 2 years. And then I was still kind of struggling to know how to practically help people, because it's more than just someone just coming and talking to you. Like, I think there's a really big misconception of like, yeah, I just need to go talk to somebody about my stuff. Yeah, but like there's more that happens there. And so I ended up doing a training called EMDR, which is short for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a modality used to specifically target trauma. And the more I've gotten into it, it's not just targeting trauma, but it's also targeting like your whole belief system. So like core beliefs, negative beliefs, your views of self, your sense of everything, and how we view ourselves, view the world, and things around us. And so I've been doing that now for probably about 4 or 5 years. And it has been amazing to see the results with clients and just how it's been able to help retrain your brain a little bit. So anyways, I'm rambling now, but
No, you're not. Love it.
so I have definitely become more so of a trauma therapist, I would say, but it's not, I tell people all the time, like, some people are like, well, I don't really have trauma. Like, we can think of trauma and it's like, oh, people that were in 9/11 or, in like experienced war and things like that. But it's so much more than that, truly. And the other thing that I just really love about EMDR is that it helps our brain function the way it's supposed to. And we take that emotional side, and I can explain more about what EMDR is, but you are, I mean, it's totally scripture as well. Like we're capturing those thoughts and transforming them into positive statements, what we know to be true, because a lot of the times we're walking around just believing the lies that people have told us or that we have told ourselves. And then that creates our sense of self and how we see ourselves and what we believe that we are capable of. And so anyways, that's, that's, I have my practice that I have now is primarily just working with EMDR in a lot of ways. So, but yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now. What I do now, I work at a place called the Carpenter Shed, which is a intensive outpatient program for young men, ages like 16 to 20. And so we work with young men who have struggled in addiction, struggling just with some severe mental health type deals, and they come and they live in a home that's local to the area, and I'm a part of the clinical health side of it, so clinical mental health side of it. And so we're working with those guys, really helping them set themselves up well to launch from there. Sometimes they're coming from a more intensive like program that they've done before, and we're kind of a step down to help them, get to that next level. But the whole point in that is like we're helping them find purpose, meaning, and direction for their lives. Who are they? Who do they want to be? Where are they going? What do they want their future to look like? And helping them in that manner. And so I do that. And then I'm also at a place called Banner, which is where I do private practice counseling. That's more just the one-on-one. At Carpenter Shed, I'm working with the guys, working with their families, doing a lot of group work and stuff like that. And Banner is more just individual one-on-one.
Keeping you very busy. I know you were doing 3 things at once for a while. Now
Oh yeah.
2?
Well, no, the third thing is I'm a licensed supervisor. And so, like I said, when you graduate from grad school, you have to work under a supervisor for 2 years and you have to meet with them on a weekly basis. And so I did get my supervisor's license as well. And so I have 8 supervisees work that I supervise.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
I a third thing. So
8? Dang.
no, I have a very hard time saying no, but I love it. And I'm also very passionate about raising up good clinicians because there are some pretty bad ones out there, just to be honest. And so, I take some responsibility in being a gatekeeper for the profession and making sure that we are equipping counselors well, because like you said, the need is super high. And, I have a lot of people that have come to me and, haven't really gotten help before. And so, because there are some people, unfortunately, that just either may not be trained very well or just, kind of there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I feel like I've seen a rise in people going to therapy, and as far as what I hear, it's like the last 15 years or so. It's like um it wasn't as common when we were teenagers. Like you didn't really hear people talking about therapy the way you do today. Maybe it's just because we're older now. We're the adults, so maybe they were talking about it, we just didn't know. But
yeah,
then when I started hearing it, it was kind of like a hush hush thing. It was like a big deal. If somebody went to a therapist, it was like something was wrong. Now
right.
I feel like you hear a lot of people going to therapy. It's kind of like, I don't know, I would almost say most people have a therapist. So in your professional opinion, why do you think it has become so popular to see a therapist?
Hmm. Well, why does anything become popular? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do think there was a huge stigma around it. I mean, for one, where I grew up, there was just not access to it. And I think the other piece now is like you have a lot of online therapists and there's a lot of remote therapists. And so there is a lot easier access to get to it, and it could also be like, we're just at that age where there are a lot of people that are going to counseling. And so, as we get older, it's like, man, was this always happening before, or is it just the age and now we just hear everybody talking about it? And so, but also like I do think one thing about the counseling profession I mean, if you look at it over the history of it in the years, it's not something that has been around forever. And so it has developed and become something that is more like relatable, it's more available, and I think counselors are more knowledgeable and we have more tools to better serve people well. Because I guess back in the day, the counselors or the psychiatrist or whatever, they were like, oh yeah, you go there and you get shock therapy or lobotomies or whatever. And that was kind of the mental health realm. And so now it's just so different. And so, I think too, there's so many more diagnoses that come out in regards to problems. And so we have all the personality disorders, whereas, oh, like, well, they're just crazy. And it's like, well, no, like they actually have ADHD, or there's, the autistic spectrum, or there's, borderline personality disorder or major depressive disorder. There's so many more diagnoses now to help people to help identify what people may or may not be struggling with. And even in that, there's a modality for everything, which is kind of funny because the more trainings I go to, I'm like, oh, this is very similar to EMDR. You're just calling it something different. But yeah, I think as we get older, as we grow up as a society, whatever, or sometimes I don't feel like we're growing up as a society, but maybe regressing.
Yeah. What are we
Maybe that's
doing?
why everybody's in therapy. Um, but yeah, I think it is just something that's becoming more of a norm. It's definitely been more normalized
Yeah.
for people to go to.
Yeah. Can you, and I didn't put this in the notes, it's just something you said a minute ago, but can you talk a little bit about trauma? I mean, because sometimes I feel like people think trauma is only like you said 9/11 or something like severe happened to you, but I believe there's kind of different levels, and sometimes, and we're going to go into kind of some abandonment things, but you could have grown up feeling a certain way, abandoned by people, and to me that would be, in today's world, kind of what you're talking about there. That's a level of trauma that you need to kind of work out. So could you talk about the different, maybe the
Sure.
level of trauma or the different ends spectrums of trauma, like one into
Yeah.
the other? And would you say, yeah, all of that's trauma? Maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do think trauma, like the words trauma and triggers and all that kind of stuff, are definitely used a lot. And I never want to minimize a person's experience, but I also never want to be like, oh, you shouldn't feel a certain way, because that's not as bad as somebody else's. I'm never going to compare it to somebody else. But kind of to explain a little bit about how EMDR works, and it kind of can talk more about the trauma piece. So, if we think about, and let me just clarify, I do not see myself as any kind of EMDR expert or anything. I'm constantly learning. I've had some great counselors that I have worked with that have, helped me and taught me, and which I'm so appreciative of. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to immerse myself in it. And so I've done a lot of work to get my certification in EMDR because I wanted to go much further past just the basic trainings, because I wanted to learn as much as I could about it. But trauma for someone once said this to me. They made this statement: intention does not negate impact. And so, which is so, so important if we think about it, because, we are all constantly hurting people all the time. And we can easily say, well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean it in that way. Like, you misunderstood. But we still have to understand, like, we impacted them in a certain way. Events impact people in a certain way. Words impact people in a certain way. And so, and whatever their sense of self, their view of self, their core beliefs, it can impact them differently. Like, we can make a joke and mean nothing by it, and it could send somebody down a whole spiral. Not that we need to walk around and just be so worried that we're going to set somebody off, but still. But so what happens, like in our brain, this is also some DBT therapy that I've been trained in as well, but our right brain versus our left brain. So our right brain is where our emotions live. And that is, if you ever seen the Inside Out movie, it's great. The second one, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they did a fantastic job. Like, so, so good. It talks a lot about sense of self, different parts of self, um, your core beliefs. Believe it's so, so good. But that right brain where our emotions live is also where trauma can be stored. Okay. And so that's why when we maybe get triggered by something, our emotions can get super heightened. Or if you've ever experienced a situation, you might overreact in a certain way and you look back and you're like, what in the world? Like, why did I just react that way? Have I lost my mind?
Yeah.
Um, no, something triggered you and it got you stuck in that circle, in that hamster wheel, if you will, in that right brain. And what happens in that is that your left brain, the logical side, the reasonable side, that's where facts and logic and reasoning are, it's cut off. Because what you need to happen is they both need to be able to talk to each other. So, like, say if you were in a really bad car accident, and you may not have really gotten to process through what happened, because our brain is this huge calculator and it's constantly processing things that we've gone through each day and it's filing it away. When you sleep, your brain is like processing. And so that's why some dreams may be really weird because your brain is trying to make sense of things. But if you go through some type of traumatic event or even just a really hard conversation with a friend or a spouse or whatever, and you don't process it well, then that's going to get stuck in that right brain. And what EMDR does is we can go back through a traumatic event, or we can identify a negative belief and identify how we feel about that, what our emotions associated are with that, and then also how we would want to feel about it or what we would want to believe about it, even if we don't feel that in that moment. And so we use bilateral stimulation. So I usually have what I call tappers, and my clients are holding the tappers and I turn them on and it buzzes in their hands back and forth. And we're just going and we're processing through that. And what it is it's activating both sides of the brain. And so that they can talk to each other. Because again, when you're in that trigger moment, it's just the right brain. Left brain is out in la la land. It's not even there. um, and so you could have, something that happened to you in kindergarten, and maybe somebody like, bullied you in kindergarten, or you weren't allowed to play with the friends, or a teacher said something to you or embarrassed you in front of the classroom. I got a whooping in kindergarten in front of the entire class with a yardstick. Granted, I grew up in the country and this was something that happened back then. But
I've
I
never
was
heard that.
yeah, it happened. I was supposedly talking in nap time. I don't think I was, maybe I was, I don't know. And I got hit with a yardstick and it traumatized me as a 5-year-old who was a rule follower. I never do anything wrong. But I never told my parents. And so my mom, I don't remember this part, but my mom told me the day before I was to go back to first grade, I just had a panic attack, freaked out, like she had no idea what was going on. But I'm in that emotion side. Like I was triggered. I was about to go back to school, but this woman had hit me with a yardstick and I was humiliated in front of the whole class. I was a terrible person. I'm not safe. I'm bad. That's what my beliefs about myself had become at that moment. And so, um, when, my mom found out about all of that, apparently, she went up to the school to raise hell
That was
because
going to be
she was,
my first question. I'm like, so what'd your mom do? Because
yeah,
thank you do. I want to know.
she was calling for that lady's job.
Oh,
But anyways, but yeah, so my left brain was not working at all, but I had gone through that entire summer probably worried about that, right?
yeah.
And but anyways, like most of my life has very much been like, I must succeed, I must do well, I must follow the rules. And not saying that that stemmed from kindergarten, but on some level, that was a traumatic event for a 5-year-old. Um,
Wow.
so but, traumas can be something like that, something that a teacher says about you, a humiliating experience. It's so interesting. I will have clients that are in their 50s and we're working through they're struggling with anxiety. They don't know what's going on. Like, I can't function. I can't think. I'm I'm suffering at work. And so there's something that's disrupting their daily life. And we'll go back to things that happened to them when they were 6 and 8. And typically it's like some abuse or things like that, things that they've never shared before. all of that builds and affects how they respond and react to people, how they build relationship, how they attach to people. Um, and so it can feel very overwhelming, and it'll make you look at your life and be like, oh my gosh, do I have hidden trauma that I don't know about? Which is not the purpose. But um, so yeah, I mean, EMDR started by working with veterans from I think World War II, really. And they were processing through things while they were walking with a therapist, and doing some different things. And so that's walking is a basic bilateral stimulation. And so I tell clients all the time, hey, end your day, like walking with your spouse, going for a walk, talk through what happened today. It's one of the best ways to help your brain kind of process and de-escalate yourself. Um, you'll hear a lot of marathon runners talk about like through training, they'll get pretty emotional and they'll start crying a lot or something. I wouldn't know. I hate running. So that's not an experience I've ever had, only crying from pain. But they're processing a lot. And
Yeah.
so that's where some of that emotion comes from.
Well, that was kind of leading into my next question is I'm definitely a believer in talking things out, like kind of learned the hard way. I would say I always give that advice. I don't always do it, Sometimes I'm be like, wow, I've been holding that in for too long and I can feel my body freaking out, needing to talk it out. Like, so I do believe you need to tell a friend, a pastor, mentor, a therapist, something. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more, like, okay, the walk, but how does that help you overcome things and work through things by speaking it out and not keeping it inside? Because I just feel like it's very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, bringing things into the light, not letting them stay in the dark, like, that's scriptural.
Yes.
It really is powerful because I think some of the things I have so many clients that will come meet with me and they're terrified to tell me things.
Yeah.
And because there's so much shame in and of itself will keep you from talking, will keep you from even believing that you could be understood by somebody else, that it causes so much fear that you're just going to be judged. Or there's so many times where the victim often feels like they're the ones that have done something wrong. I've worked with a lot of abuse victims. And so, but there's this belief, one, they have told people in the past and weren't heard, or told, no, that didn't happen. Um, or that they were responsible in some way, that a 6-year-old should have, you know, convinced their grandfather to leave them alone or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, but if we don't talk about it, then it didn't happen. And so we compartmentalize a lot of things in our brain to survive. So that's another piece that happens is, in order for us to accept what happened, or in order for us to survive what has happened, we put that in a box and we put it away and we shove it down and we don't have to acknowledge it. And then we can just go on in our day to day. But then what happens is, just like I was talking about earlier, something happens to trigger that Pandora's box gets opened, and you start lashing out at your husband and you're like, what am I even mad at you for? I don't know. But he did something that he didn't even know that he did. And it's affecting something, your child part or your child self that was abused at 6. And so being able to talk through those things, it also helps you understand why you respond the way that you respond. Because there's so many times I can't tell you how many times people will say, like, I just feel like I'm crazy. I just feel like I'm crazy. Like, what is wrong with me? And it's because they're being affected by something that they don't even realize. Um, and so, I think there is on the flip side of that, some people just like to trauma dump on people. And I think we need to be careful about that as well. Um, and so, which isn't really actually processing through anything. It's just this need to be seen, which is,
Issue.
to go to therapy for that.
Another
Um,
topic.
yeah. So I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Just kind of the power of like what it does for you to talk something out. Like there is power in telling somebody because they also just bring a different perspective. Like you were saying, some things it's like it's not as bad as you thought it was. And I'm not touching, abuse and things like that. But there are things in your life, maybe mistakes you made, and you build it up in your head that it's this huge thing. And it's like, it's so not.
Yes. Yeah.
Everyone has made mistakes. Everyone has sinned. And you keep it inside, and the enemy convinces you you're the only one that's done it and that nobody will forgive you. And you hear a lot, I'm sure you give this advice. How would you talk to yourself in that situation? Or I'm sorry, how would you talk to a friend, your younger sibling? If they were struggling with something, you would have so much grace and compassion for them. You're
Right.
like, it's okay. I forgive you. Let's just work through this. But we don't talk to ourselves like that at all.
Yes. Um, one of the most powerful things I think that we can do is like care and nurture for ourselves, because like just like you said, like we would never treat our sibling that way or our spouse that way, but we're gonna beat ourselves
Yeah,
up.
absolutely.
And so one of the practices that I do in EMDR is we look at our different parts of self. It's so powerful because if you think about we're having conversations with ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
We are not multiple personality, but like we're constantly having conversations with ourselves. And so there's different parts to ourselves. And a big one is our child part that will always be with us. But our child part, our nurturer part, our critical part, mine's pretty big for my critical part,
Yeah.
um, our protector part. And so that's another piece. Like our protector part is that one that's like, no, do not go tell anybody what
Mhm.
has happened. Like they will not understand. You will not be understood. And that is such a lie of the enemy too, because he would love nothing more than for us to stay stuck where
Yeah.
we're in our own mess and not actually fully walking in freedom. Um, but like one of the most powerful things that I do in EMDR is when we've kind of processed through an event, I will have, my current client at their current age then talk to that part of themselves at that stage that they were in, like that 12-year-old or that 6-year-old. And like I'll have them literally visualize. It's a lot of imaging, imaging. Is that the word? Yeah, visualization, um, and visualizing themselves together.
Mhm.
And that, like, people just break down and weep at that because that's what they need is that child part needs that nurturing so bad. And for someone just to like put their arm around them and
Yeah.
being like, hey, like what happened was not your fault. And or like you're okay. Like look at where you are now. Like you have, a family and you have accomplished so many things and you are loved and just speaking life over them. And so we have to nurture all those parts of ourself. And so that's
So
just that's just really important. I love EMDR. It's so much fun.
awesome. I just want to talk about abandonment. As a Christian, I'm a firm believer just in the spiritual things first. And we've talked about, you've been saying that about what the enemy lies to us about. And I feel like from things from your childhood all the way up, all the way from like they didn't want you playing on the soccer team or they didn't pick you here to something maybe a parent said or a sibling said or a friend said. It's like you take all that stuff with you into your adult life if you don't process it and work on it. And as adults, it's just constant lies from the enemy that now these friends don't want me around. Well, my parents obviously don't love me, or they don't love me as much as this, or, whatever the lie is, it's a constant lie that you're not good enough. And for me, I think there's so much of that is actually rooted in abandonment, a spirit of abandonment. So could you talk a little bit about maybe your opinion about that, but also how you help people get through that? I think it's just a lie. Abandonment is a lie that you weren't good enough. You
Mm,
know, those people left you because you weren't good enough, or
yeah.
those people didn't pick you or didn't love you, or they treated you this way because you weren't good enough. And how many adults, even maybe ourselves, we see that in our adult selves. You've struggled with that. Okay, well, I wasn't good enough to do that. I didn't pass that test. I didn't pass something, I wasn't good enough. So could you talk a little bit about abandonment?
Sure. I do think that that is a very common negative belief or, false cognition, whatever you want to call it, that everybody struggles with. And so, um, like I can't even begin to tell you like how common that is with any trauma. Like, and that's because any hard or difficult event, a trauma or something being said about you, or you maybe not measuring up to something that you really wanted to, it's always going to go down to I'm not good enough, right? Which then goes into like, well, I'm only as good as what I can accomplish, or I'm only as good as what other people say about me versus who I know myself to be. And so then our whole identity and who we are is so wrapped up in things and other people and
But
which
people,
yeah. And so, but if that's where I mean, if that's the case, then like we're at constant risk of being abandoned because people will fail you. And so, and we're not going to be perfect at everything. And like one of my friends said this to me one time and I will never forget it. And she was like, Kirby, because I'm older, I'm about to be 38 and I'm still single. God bless. Um, but do what?
you're in good company.
Yeah. But my friend Emily, she was like, Kirby, signing that marriage license, you're basically signing away the right for somebody else to just ruin your life. And I was like, wow. I was like, that is one way to think about it. But again, like being in relationship with people, putting yourself out there in general, there's going to be some type of risk to fail or to not measure up. But like, what are we comparing ourselves to? So abandonment can kind of be very hard versus like, you know, someone experiencing true abandonment, like their birth parents gave them up for adoption, or like your spouse has left you, like no longer wants to be married to you, or even like, like losing someone to death or something like that. That can very much feel like abandonment. And so, there's an array there, I feel like, but um I think and this may go into some other stuff that we can talk about, but um, if our identity is wrapped up in that, then we have to be very careful because there's always going to be the risk for that. And so, if our identity is in being a wife, if our identity is being a mom, if our identity is being a certain employee, all of those things can go. And so like what is our identity being built on? Um, but yeah, like feel like that's a common thing as far as, feeling abandoned by friends or family or whatever that may be. And so the way that I challenge that is, or work with people through that is, for one, identifying what that negative belief is and what it's associated with. And then kind of helping them process through that, because when they can process through it and rationally speak to that emotion or rationally speak to that, you know, negative cognition or belief, they can see like, okay, well, actually, it's probably more on them than it is on me. And kind of re-identifying who they are in that scenario, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we were just saying of like, you need to talk it out with somebody. Like, there's definitely stages in your walk with the Lord that you can work that out with the Holy Spirit, but most people need help. Most people in their journey becoming adults, becoming spiritually mature, and you may always need it. I don't know, you may be the type of person that always just needs to talk it out with somebody. Maybe that's how you process. But like you're saying, rationalizing that, talking that out. Okay, well, that's not just you in your head figuring it out. You're having to talk it out with somebody. Just goes back to the power of talking it out.
Yeah. And I would say, like, I think there are levels of this too, because um, if you feel abandoned because maybe you lost a certain group of friends or something like that, that's going to be very different than, someone who has grown up or, and was adopted, because those are just two very different levels of abandonment, right? And so, and again, I think that's another term that we can use pretty loosely, that we're like, well, I've just been abandoned by everyone. Because the other piece in that I try to challenge is like, okay, are we staying in a victim mindset here and we're not taking responsibility for maybe our own stuff in this? Versus like, was I truly abandoned, if that makes sense?
Absolutely.
Because there's so much stuff that's gone into, there's a book, called The Primal Wound, and it talks a lot about adoption. Because I would say there's some true beliefs of abandonment for people that have been adopted. And some may not experience that, and that's great because I think adoption is beautiful and very much needed. But depending on the circumstances around that as well, like the brain development that happens for a young child, they're often trying to piece together a story, that why was I given up, or why did my parents not want me? And so there's a lot of beliefs that then get created from very young and carried into their adulthood based off of just that whole experience. So I would say that's a very different level, but
Absolutely. Just kind of talking about identity. When I became a Christian, you became a Christian, my identity changed. And I no longer have to be lost or confused about who I am or just my life, what I'm doing. Everything now, I identify everything with God's word. Who I am, I have the ability to now look at God's word and find myself in there. And that's a journey, learning how to do that, getting help along the way on how to do that. But what are some things you've learned in your career and just kind of the medical side of things about identity?
um yeah, I would say we focus on that quite a bit at the carpenter shed. We have a lot of guys come in and between the ages of 16 and 20, and they have no idea who they are, or their identity has been wrapped up in drugs or porn or relationship, whatever. And so, and we're a Christian organization. We're not like forcing that down people's throats because we're loving them where they're at, right? We do have a lot of parents that can kind of tend to focus on like, we want his identity to be in Christ and just be the man that God's called him to be, and that's great. And they have no idea what that means. And so,
I didn't know what that meant at 16.
no, do we still, like, we're still working on it.
Journey.
Um,
On a journey.
yeah. And so I do think in all of that, especially with mental health in the ministry world, there can be a ton of spiritual bypassing, and which I think is, something that happens of like, oh, well, the Lord is taking that depression away from you and you're good. And we just totally bypass like the hard and the fact that there's still a struggle, and that's okay. You haven't failed in any certain kind of way. Like your identity doesn't have to be your depression. Like your identity is that we are made strong in our weakness. Like he makes us strong in our weakness. But I think we can miss a lot when we just kind of bypass all of that. But it takes a lot of work to even understand what scripture says we are, who scripture says we are, what that means, our identity in Christ. And I think even just for me, I always felt like I couldn't measure up to what I was supposed to be. So I couldn't have my identity in Christ because I would constantly fail, which, is why we need Christ, and our identity has to be in him. Uh, but I think of it with these guys a lot that come into the carpenter shed because, they're just, man, they're a mess. They're a hot mess. And so they have no idea like that they can have a different direction. They have no idea what it means to have purpose and have meaning. And so helping them even to start even thinking in that. But the other piece too is that they have been told that they need to do a certain thing or be a certain way, and they haven't measured up there. And so if they fail here, then they're just going to go find their identity in something else that they feel like they can be successful at. And that will be drugs or girls or whatever that may be. We are constantly looking for a place to belong. Everybody wants to belong somewhere. And if we can't do it here, we're going to do it here. And then that's what becomes their identity. Also, the world has all these ideas about who we should be and, what our lives should look like. And so we're constantly trying to conform to what society says we should be. Or if our whole goal is just to be accepted by people, then we're just going to be a chameleon, and I'm going to be this way in front of these people, I'm going to be this way in front of these people because I want to be accepted by everybody. But then when it's just you sitting with yourself, you're like, who am I?
Yeah.
And they can't answer that. And so identity is it's such a multifaceted, layered thing, I think, for people. Just, that just asking someone the question, like, who are you? I remember when I was in that discipleship program in Washington, we were given an assignment to complete, and it was, who are you? And so I did this whole presentation on all of my awards and successes and everything that I had accomplished throughout my, how old was I? I don't know, 22 years. And gosh, Daniel Hunt was the one who was doing the class, and he was like, Kirby, you told us nothing about who you are. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm great. Look at all these things. He's like, those are accomplishments and those are things that you've done, but it does not speak to anything about who you are. And that like rocked me. I was like, okay, who am I? Like who is Kirby without all of the accomplishments and the awards and you know, who am I? And so I kind of had to go on this journey of if I didn't have all of those things, would I still be enough? And so am I still enough for um as a daughter, as a sister, as a child of God, and
Hard.
really comfortable with who I am. So
Hard. It's to be vulnerable like that because you can't think of anything good at first. You're like,
no,
no, I don't know.
no. And what I realize is at the very core of me, my deepest fear is that if people really knew who I was, then they would not love me.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with that. It's not like that just goes away. Like you have to constantly work on that, because if we get in a bad place or if we experience something difficult, then that comes back and like screaming at us of like, well, I guess you were right. Like the fear that you had all along, but you have to constantly combat that with like, no, like, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And like the Lord created me just as I am. And he is proud of me and he loves me and he has good things in store for me. And, you know, that can be hard when you're not in a good place.
Yeah. And especially that when you're first learning how to do that, when you're young, when you're a young Christian, it's hard to know how to go there. That's why for me, listening to sermons on topics that I'm struggling with always helped me because they would quote scriptures. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was in there, and then that
Yeah.
became scripture that helped me build my identity, my new identity. But it is very hard to do that at the beginning because you don't know what you're doing. So it's powerful to get the help that you need with that because that's what will change your life when
Yeah.
you start identifying with the word of God.
Yes. And it takes practice. Like, there's a book called The Soul of Shame, and he talks about, I'm going to get the statistics wrong, but he talks about how it takes our brain like 0.0003 seconds to process a negative thought, and it takes us like 2 full minutes to process one positive thought, something crazy like that, because we are naturally predisposed to think negatively. And the other thing that happens, like our brain is plastic, if you think of like roadways on our brain, those negative thoughts are just going, and they got some grooves in there that they're used to going in. And when you start changing that and thinking positive thoughts, you're creating new pathways in your brain that you're not used to doing. And so like that takes so much time and practice to do that. Um, so it's wild. Our brain is wild.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about social media and
Mm.
mental health. We all know the world changed in the early 2000s. I mean, I know the internet came around before that, but social media came around the early 2000s and this new pressure came on. I personally believe it came on the millennials because we were teenagers graduating high school, going into our 20s, becoming adults, getting careers. So it was like kind of serious ages in one sense where you are forming your identity as an adult. Well, who am I going to be, you know? So I feel like our parents, millennials parents, did not know how to help us. They did not know what to do with this because brand new. This is a
Yeah.
brand new pressure. No one knows what it is, but the millennials felt it. I feel like our parents, the pressures were get married, have kids, go to college, whatever, you know, and you could really only compare yourself when you were with people because television was even different, obviously, back then, you know. So to compare, okay, I want a baby and I still don't have one. Well, when I go to church, when I go to parties, I see these people have kids and I don't.
Yeah.
Now the millennials and everyone after us are looking at, or for millennials, you know, it was like we started seeing people dancing, making videos, going on one trip after the other. And it was like this new pressure that this life before, and I understand things change, that's just part of life, but now being a mom and having a job that where you sit at a desk, um, these kind of things weren't good enough anymore. I feel like that is what social media has done to us, that these lives that we have all known and grown up with, it wasn't good enough anymore. So you have an added pressure to, okay, well, I'm not married yet. I don't have kids yet, and I'm not doing these things that I see on social media. And then you add to that that it's like it's a 24/7, um it's right there at my fingertips that I can sit and compare myself to who I'm not, what I don't have, what I haven't done. It's right there 24/7, as opposed to, you know, every now and then when I'd go out or I'd see people or talk on the phone, oh yeah, I don't have that. They have what I don't have. Now it's just right there. It's constant.
Yeah.
Um, so that to me is, I personally believe, along with all the other things we've been talking about, social media has, to me, created the term mental health because I don't feel like we heard that growing up, right? It's like,
Well, it's
yeah,
the access piece again. Like we don't have, we did, well, the only time we really saw counselors growing
yes,
up was like in the TV shows or in the movies. And so now we have all this access. And so we see it. And so, yeah, it's definitely something. I think that's another piece that has made it much more commonplace.
yeah. There's a part of it that's mental health is connected to social media. And I feel like that. I'm even talking for myself. I'm not, you know, criticizing anybody. But I just feel like with the rise of the internet, you're getting the rise of mental health issues because you're constantly comparing and you're constantly seeing what in your mind you're saying, I don't have that, or I don't live up to that. So it's these new pressures that our generation was the first one to feel it because we were becoming the adults, you know? So, um,
Yeah, I remember when Facebook came out and you had to have the college email. And so I signed up. I guess I was a freshman or a sophomore and signed up for Facebook and then the MySpace. And you
oh
had
my
to, I mean, MySpace, I don't know, I probably still have it out there somewhere. I don't even know. But you had the song, but then you ranked your friends like,
gosh, your top 10.
you're
Yeah.
not my number one this week. Somebody else is like, what?
No.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
it was like I know everybody knows that, but like that was brand new. Like what that did all to our brains, you know?
yeah. Well, so what there, oh, gosh, there's so much. And first off, like, granted, there's not a ton of, hasn't been enough time yet really for there to be a ton of research in regards to like, does this directly relate to increased suicide? Does this directly relate to poor mental health? Because you can blame it on whatever, but comparison will always steal your joy because you're focusing on other people and looking at what you think is you're not good enough in, and you're not like this person. We have no idea what's behind that picture, obviously, but I mean,
How quickly you forget it when you're the one looking at it, you know? It's like
yeah,
I didn't think I was doing that. And then one day I realized there was this one page I was looking at and I'm like, okay, I picked up on it. I was feeling sad every time I would like leave their page and I'm like, there's nothing sad about what they just posted. And then I realized, well, it was something that I desire and I don't have it yet. And I would leave that going, gosh, I don't have it, you know? So it wasn't even jealousy. It goes back to what you don't have, you know, or a lot of it. So I have really gotten to the point where I only get on like once a day, maybe every other day, you know, to just like and I'm following the things that I feel like try to get me upset because it's like that's not reality. Like my reality is my life and the people in my life that I'm wanting to help or make sure that these people know Jesus. That's my life. These things, that's great. And I'm happy for them. But what's my life? Because what this person does, that doesn't mean that's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I do think it is a good thing for you to kind of check yourself because if you're not able to celebrate other people and, their joys or what they have, that's a good indicator, hey, this is probably not good for me. Or if you feel this pressure that you have to have a certain number of likes or that you need to look a certain way. Like it's just I know for me if there were certain things, like because I desire to be married with kids and it can feel like time is running out for that. And so when I see that, I'm like, sometimes I get angry and frustrated. And I'm like, well, Lord, like, what you doing? And so then I get mad at him. And so, like, that's just not a good place for me to be because then my identity is shifting and what I believe about myself is shifting. My sense of self is shifting. And because I'm being so inundated with what other people have versus being grateful and content with where the Lord has me. Because at the end of the day, like if I was married with kids right now, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And there's so much that I'm doing that I know the Lord has led me to that like his plan is the best plan. And so, but I can quickly lose that when I'm so inundated with watching all the things and what I think I should have, or, wondering why I don't have something. Um, but I will say too about social media, like if it's just the kids that are struggling with it, man, it's everybody.
It is true.
Like, I mean, it has affected so many things. Like people just ripping each other apart when you would never have some of these conversations in person. Like, what is it that you think gives you the license to speak to people in such a way? And for one, that you're a coward because you can't do it to their face and you have to do it over a freaking Facebook post. But oh man, but I did see so the Surgeon General, the US doctor or whatever, he has been advocating, he or she, I'm not sure, but they've been advocating for Congress to mandate warnings for social media, just like they would for tobacco and alcohol. And so this is a doctor advocating for that because they see the harmful effects that it is having, specifically for kids, because there's just so many pieces of they are so overstimulated. And, all of these apps are created to keep the user using. And so the other thing that it's doing is it's hitting off all these chemicals in your brain. So you're getting all these dopamine hits because you're getting stuff that you want to see. And like, then you need more. It's just like a drug. Like you need more of that stuff in order to feel good. And so we're going to constantly pick up our phone and like your finger automatically goes to that little social media button. And I moved mine. Like I did a fast one year and turned everything off, turned off all the notifications, which I never turned back on, by the way. And that was the best thing. So I have no notifications turned on. I have them moved to a separate, like it's like on the third page in another little folder thing. So like I have to work to get there versus just opening it up and going to it really fast. Um, and I'm much happier.
What's funny is like I I feel like you and I are kind of old souls in the sense of like we're not even that much like we're not even on social media that much. And for
Right.
it to affect us the little bit that we're on, can you imagine what these children are physically going through? I mean, I don't have the notifications on. It's just like I leave my phone at home so many mornings when I go to work because it's not glued to my hip. I've just never been that kind of person. I'm so thankful I was part of like the last generation that we grew up without the internet, you know? I'm so thankful. So I still have that. It's like we're too old of souls to just really care that much. So the little bit that we have cared, bless their hearts. I mean, it is just
I know it's rough when guys come into
bullying
our
that goes
program.
into it. You had the
Do
bull,
what?
then you add the bullying that goes into it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, bullying. I mean, there's so many things. How easy it is to bully. The other thing that it's doing is it's creeping into their sleep because they're staying on it all night, which it's hitting off those dopamine, which you need serotonin to go to sleep. And so it's not giving you serotonin, it's giving you that dopamine, which is keeping you up. And so it's taking your sleep away. It takes away in-person time. Like people don't know how to talk to people each other in person anymore, like at all. um all of our guys that come into the carpenter shed, we take their phones away, and so they don't have their phones for like the first 2-ish months, and it's like they're coming out of a, well, some of them are really coming out of smoking pot all the time, but like coming out of a haze. And it's learning how to interact, learning how to look people in the eye, learning how to have a conversation. And when they get their phones back, when they start working again, it's a struggle to keep them engaged sometimes, but it's better than it was before. And we still like, pick up their phones at a certain time at night, but trying to teach them boundaries because they have to learn how to set those boundaries for themselves. Because that's what we've done. We set boundaries for ourselves. And so everybody needs a boundary. Where do you end and where does somebody else or something begin? Um, and so, but it definitely, the other thing that I've seen it affect quite a bit is body image. Like, which body image has always been a struggle. Body shaming has always been a big thing. Um, but how much it's impacting people more so because of social media as well is really, really increased. But um, yeah, it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what the world is like in 20 years.
Oh, I know. We have to stay strong.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good things with it too. I mean, like there is some benefits to getting information out there. I mean, like we know about things that are going on across the world that we would have not known about, or it would have taken way too long for us to hear anything about, which news is a totally different thing that gets me going down a really bad spiral. Um, and they're, being connected to family that you wouldn't necessarily be as connected to. And so like we have family all across the country. And so that we see a post and we're like, oh, like there is a sense of feeling more connected. But the other thing that happens, and this is why pornography is such a bad issue in the mental health world, is what it's doing is it's sending off all these mirror neurons in our brain that make us feel like we're connecting with people when we're not. And so we are more connected to this than we are to each other. And so that's because it's firing off those mirror neurons in our brain, which is why pornography is so addicting and so hard to break. Um, because if you feel like if you are wrapped up in not having a strong identity in who you are and you are fearful of abandonment, well, it's going to be a lot easier to build a connection with a screen than it is with a person because that's a lot less risky and you are in control.
Exactly.
And so that can that can lead us down a whole nother path. But
Put it. That's a great way to put it. So good. Do you have any other last tips or anything any advice for people you'd love to give them? Anything that comes to mind? Just to have a strong mental health and
take care of yourself. um, I mean, I think boundaries are something that I teach a lot with the parents that I work with and the guys that I work with. And so I'm really bad at setting boundaries for myself. And so if I know that I am maybe spending too much time on my phone, or I'm spending too much time working and not taking care of myself, or, not not going and seeing a therapist when I need to. Because there was a season where I was like, I need to go talk to a therapist. Just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you don't need one. And so like being able to even just ask yourself, like, what do I need? Not being afraid to do that. There is no shame in that.
good. My last question that I've been at that I'll ask all the guests is what's your favorite thing about yourself?
Oh,
That is everyone's reaction. Oh,
on the list. My favorite
yeah.
thing about myself. I love being an aunt.
Oh,
So, um, those girls, my sister has three girls. Have you met all of them?
yes, yes.
Okay. They are something. So Myra, for her birthday, I gave her some tickets. I'm not doing toys anymore. These kids don't need no more toys. They don't need no more screen, nothing. And so we do memories and we do things. And so we went and saw Inside Out 2 and she spent the night with me the night before. But she is all about that quality time. So she was just like so excited. But I just love it. Like I love being an aunt, especially if I don't have kids of my own yet. And so I really try to spend as much time with them as I can.
Awesome. Well, I'm very proud of you. You've done a fabulous job in your career and your life, and you're an amazing person.
Thanks, Laura.
Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Questions Podcast. I hope you'll reach out to Kirby or me if you have any questions. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the Questions Podcast.